This video will be a continuation of a series we've been doing, especially in regards to the Parthenon, but ancient systems of measure that we use have sort of been passed on, still embedded with us today, and well, hidden in plain sight, as they say. And how will the Parthenon, and I'll put the links in the description, but especially one in regards to Temple of Olympian Zeus and the Doric, Ionic, and the Cremona scale, which I'm proposing either was or later came to be the Corinthian foot, and we'll examine that because we'll have to go through like some especially symbolism that's been passed on through the likes of Freemasonry and also through architecture. But the most important feature of this video will be the connections from ancient Greece through to the very early Buddhist period, especially around Ashoka period. Greco-Buddhist architecture is another term for it, around about the time of Alexander, but how there was a flow of knowledge from places such as Greece to India. It's not well, for instance, around the Pythagorean time, it's not at all secret that both the Greeks were traveling to Egypt in search of knowledge, but also knowledge was coming from ancient India, Pakistan, the Gandhara region, and so both Hindu and Buddhist traditions, knowledge, the use of numbers, measures and proportions in their temples, and how again this can all be measured. But there we see the Parthenon in the Temple of Olympian Zeus, the first true Corinthian temple, not the first temple to include a Corinthian column, but the first temple to be of, at least in the Greek terms, of truly Corinthian architecture. Standard Freemason tracing board, again you're going to find it in many other groups, but we have the three columns, the Doric, the Ionic and the Corinthian, and they have meaning, again written by the 1st century architect, Roman architect Vitruvius. And for instance, the Doric is a column of the male column, or the column of strength, which at some point become connected to sight. The Ionic column is the female column, or the column of wisdom, which become connected to feeling. But of the three columns, the third is the Corinthian column, is like an example animation, a model there. And so those leaves swirling, coming off there, and those curls is based on the Acanthus plant. Now, curious thing is studying this sacred architecture, this legacy here in Australia. Every historic site, church of importance that's connected to, especially to Freemasonry or to certain architects such as Edmund Blackett, James Barnett, not only is Acanthus featured in the architecture, it's also grown even in like small country towns such as Marulan, which has a strong connection to timekeeping. One of the first Freemason taverns was there. But so how did the let's look at the story of how the Corinthian column emerged. And so a freeborn maiden of Corinth, aged to marry. So the Corinthian column is the virgin column or the maiden column. So this young woman died early age. Her nurse put all her possessions in a bell-shaped jar or a crater, then put a tile on top to protect it from the elements. This burial procedure is very interesting, where you'll find it in certain places in ancient Greece and elsewhere. But what the nurse, according to the legend, what the nurse didn't know, that there was an acanthus root growing underneath the basket, and so as spring came, the acanthus root grew because of the shape of the bell-shaped of the crater, the bell-shaped container, and because of a tile on top. As the acanthus leaf grew, it caused it to swirl, and so not only the acanthus leaf decorations in the lower part of the Corinthian column, but even those swirls, which are almost Ionic-esque in design. But now the architect, sculptor Callimachus come along, saw this, and that was the inspiration for him to create this particular type of architecture. You'll see it in all the major capital buildings, so many other places. But for instance, in the earlier portion I just did a comparison: White House, U.S. Supreme Court, U.S. Capitol building. These are all built into there, and there are many strong connections. Now, still to this day, you'll find more than several references to Acanthus being plant especially connected to funerals, and so this element of funerals, and the broken column, which is a symbol of an early death, and you'll find it in war memorials. I think it's the Prince Hall Lodge. If you'll see this broken column as a gravestone, it typically means that this person died before their age, and so we have a not only to and the broken column is always, you'll notice that it is a broken Corinthian column as well. So we have this connection going back to ancient Greece and how it's been passed on still with us today. But the most relevant previous episode into this was in regards to the weights and measures, and so I showed how the Doric and Ionic foot and the so-called modern English foot actually goes back to this period in time, and how the Parthenon at 48 feet, that's important to remember, 48 feet high columns, how it is also a unity point between the so-called common foot, or as we would call it now, the English foot. Yet the Temple of Olympian Zeus, the first Corinthian order column. Now, Ionic and Doric are documented, and of course they feature on the Mason tracing board. But what of the Corinthian column? Is there a Corinthian measure? Is that connected to there? And I'd like to propose that it is actually what's come to be known as the Cremona foot, and for the reasons as we'll see here. So that we have a Corinthian column, and it's scaled at 56 Cremona feet. The Doric, Ionic and common foot of the Parthenon come together at 48 feet, and well, the Cremona 56 feet equals 48 Cremona feet. So we have this reference. We're coming back to these very important numbers, very important in geometry, Pythagorean schools, Hermeticism, inbuilt to like all the major architecture, cathedrals, capital buildings, state capitals. Did a whole series on state capitals all across the US. Same thing in important state buildings, cathedrals, so forth here in Australia. You're also going to find it in Canada. You're going to find it elsewhere, all across the world, cross time, cross cultures, and we'll get to that because we're going to show. So the Doric, the Ionic, and the Corinthian. Well, I'm proposing that the what's later come to be known as the Cremona foot, which has essentially disappeared from reference, but was well known, especially in the late 18th, early 19th century. And just again, Mason board, you see the Doric, the Ionic, and the Corinthian, and there are also other elements which connect sun, earth, moon, geometry, all, especially tools of measure, tools of masonry as in literal construction. This is a more modern board, but again you see how this theme, Doric, Ionic, Corinthian, carries through. Again, the one a little bit older, same themes again, Jacob's ladder, the anchor, all these other points. But the point is Doric, Ionic and Corinthian are not just visual types of architecture, they're also systems of measure connected to them. The Doric and the Ionic, it's pretty much, it's documented. It's you have to be a little bit resistant to anything to again, it's there, it's in the Salamis stone, covered that in earlier episodes. But Corinthian capitals, and back to Acanthus. So at the Odeum in Athens as well, we see a Corinthian capital there, and the Acanthus plant next to it. The Acanthus, basically the first garden plant that's on record. Very important, and we'll go into a little bit of that. There's so much information I'd like to share eventually in regards to that, but here's an example of a Corinthian be a colonnade. It's like a half capital, but we see there how it's that's based on the Acanthus plant, and we're going to have a look at connections and how this goes beyond the Greco-Roman world and actually extends over to India, and we'll even can extend that to places such as Angkor Wat and Buddhist and Hindu temples, even further into Southeast Asia, East Asia. Again, you're going to find the Acanthus growing in here in Sydney, where there's a site of very significance, especially connected to any legacy of Freemasons, that type of architecture, or for instance Hyde Park, founded by Lachlan Macquarie, all into his measures and stuff. There, it's always there. And it's interesting that once I sort of cottoned onto this, it's how often you'll see it prominently displayed even in Hollywood and in TV shows. Now, whether this is on deliberate, whether it's some sort of echo, I can't really be sure. But it's not just about columns; it's also sort of corbels and these other decorations. But yeah, there's a lot to this plant. It's hidden in plain sight. It's bloody everywhere. In so many other places. I will get into it in detail. I've been researching it for a couple of years now. It's there's a lot to it, going back to ancient Greece, not only ancient Greece, ancient Egypt, Sumer, and even the very ancient Hindu, such as in relation to Garuda and the Yugas and so forth. But another example is over at the coronation of the kings and queens of England, even like the Bible ritual of anointing the king with oil. Well, the ampulla and spoon has acanthus decorations. That's one part of a coronation where the cameras were turned away. It's still a secret part of the coronation. Now, in regards to Freemasonry, you're going to see it in decorations such as a ring there, but also um, Des Moines, for instance. I detailed the strong links there, the architecture, all of that in the state capitals. It's there, it's everywhere, cross time, cross cultures. But even Masonic lodges named after Acanthus. Okay, now Greco-Buddhist architecture. So first to fourth century actually goes back earlier than that, but what we see is Corinthian capitals and with the Buddha on the inside. So essentially, when Alexander come through, there was a transmission of Greek styles of architecture to India, but the Indians had been influencing the Greeks centuries before that, back to times of Pythagoras, etc. But in northern I think it's the Surkat temple complex, Gandhara. Again, we see these Corinthian capitals being used there. So there's a cross-fertilization of knowledge had been happening in regards to astronomy, geometry. Yeah, quite amazing. It's sort of not like too secret, but it's just something that's not really talked about. We tend to have this image that the Romans and the Eastern people were not in contact. They were not in trade. Well, it's just really silly, because they were. The trade goods moved. For instance, in Rome, they had to bring in a special law because so many Chinese silks were coming into Rome. The toga industry was under pressure. So the trade of goods and knowledge from east to west has been going on for quite some time. But now we need to, even sort of that earlier picture, even Atlas holding up the world, featured in Gandhara and Pakistan, India, ancient architecture. Sanchi Stupa, probably the oldest stone structure in India, began by Ashoka, 3rd century, 2nd century BC. The gate, Tirana Gate, which we will have a look at as well, that was the 1st century AD. But for instance, on top of the stupa, we have his umbrella structure, it's sometimes called. Now at Surkat, which is this temple, is featured here, you notice that we have the same thing, very like a lingam, I suppose, but also with the acanthus. Now at Taxila in Pakistan, same feature, but also much more Corinthian, very Greek in that style. Again, acanthus featured. But Sanchi Stupa, the Great Stupa, there are several stupas there. I'm focusing on the Great Stupa, and we're going to see how these again symbols have been transmitted across, but also systems of measurement. Interesting feature, like again earlier videos, swastika, origins of this and how it's connected. I won't go into that for now, but even NASA and there's some papers published on the astronomy and the alignments. All stone circles, all these old temples are all astronomically aligned. It's become, yeah, archaeoastronomy is like a detailing this more and more and actually going back in time quite a bit. So one of the carvings at Sanchi Stupa, there you can see it's not to exact scale, but you can see the stupa. It's a bit like elongated, and even the gateway there. But what's interesting as well, because you have these figures, and now this is I think this represents the like the opening ceremony, the celebrations of it. but what we have is even foreigners there who are, and especially Greeks, and we can see, I'll highlight that in a second. The Phrygian cap appears once more over here. Even the instruments is quite, and even to some, well, the records, the information was going back and forth. The world was much more open and global back in these times, and what it is now. The way we look at borders and nations and cultures, it's very uh, yeah, like neatly defined with lines on the map. But that's not the way that nature and knowledge works. Borders, yeah, it's lines on maps. Doesn't really mean too much in regards to those things. But the Tirana gate here in front of the stupa, and there are more than a few interesting references there. Especially notice those swirls on the end there. Very ionic in design, but that's something just something for consideration. What's important is like what we would call a griffonic, the winged lion, um, and well, they're featured there. And these are, of course, very important symbols in the Greco-Roman world, and you'll still see it in architecture. It's been carried on for this ancient knowledge, but also at the Sanchi Stupa we see a true griffin. By what I mean is like a lion's body, wings, and yet there has a beak, like a bird's beak, is fusion of the lion and the bird, as where the winged lion, strictly speaking, would be labelled a griffonic or something like that. Now, for example, how, because Sydney very hermetic, because I've been able to travel around, get some footage and photos of places in Sydney, around Australia, and how this has been carried on. But in Centennial Park, full of this architecture, this symbolism, we have a griffonic. Now there's two, so there's one on either side of a road, and they're guarding, very much like a sphinx. These griffonics are guards. As I mentioned in the earlier episode, for instance, the Parthenon was not just a temple, it was also a treasury building, and whether it's a griffonic or a griffin, they're going back in time, they're guardians of places, and even that's yeah. Anyway, I won't go into that for now. But Centennial Park, once more, has all these columns, all this architecture built in, very very Freemasonic, very very esoteric. Sometimes a little bit subtle, but in other examples, it's very blatant. But so the griffonic, the winged lion, and the griffin. Now there are, for instance, in the Grace Brothers building on Broadway in Sydney, here we see griffin representations, like a true griffin, because it has the beak as well as the wings. Now, just as one example, however, these symbols, which are less than a relatively modern, they're here in Australia. They're not ancient. They're not weren't designed and built back then, but it's been passed on, and so there's plenty of examples in Rome and ancient Greece, and we'll see those. Here's another gateway in India as well, and what's interesting. So on either side at the top, you see this winged, um, more like a wyvern in design. But see, I wish could be able to get a high res picture just of that. But what we see is there we get an example of it now. Back to Sydney in a moment, and one of the Fraser fountains, just next to St Mary's Cathedral. Again, by the measures, by the numbers, all that type of stuff. But this fountain, not only does it heavily feature Corinthian order architecture, but you see that wyvern figure on the top, and how the tail turns into acanthus leaves once again. So we have the corbels, look, that's the little support stones underneath the roof there, ceiling, acanthus, but also, of course, Corinthian acanthus design sculptures. So quite clearly, in regards to the transmission Greco-Buddhist architecture from east to west. Now, here's another example of that: the State Library of New South Wales, which again is resplendent in both the lovely measures and also the symbolism, because it features Corinthian Ionic columns in it as well. But there on either side where we see the Griffonic or the winged lion, again, just like as in Sanchi Stupa. Now I've highlighted a section and we'll see, I'll zoom in on that so you get a better view of it. And what do we have? We have once more the griffin, whose body, or the wyvern, maybe call it as well, whose body then turns into this leafed, canvas leafed scrolling. Just a bit of video, so like on the inside of the state library here in New South Wales, you might notice the palmet, but again, Corinthian columns, Corinthian colonnades, even the supports there, like on that on the balcony, you'll notice there's again Acanthus featured once more. It's like, you know, like it's really, it's everywhere. It's in, again, major public buildings, cathedrals, not just, you know, some 7-Eleven somewhere. One of these standard arguments is, well, anyway, there's some really poor arguments in regards to, oh, it's just a standard feature, and, you know, but, well, it's no, it's designed, it's architectured, it's quite a bit of money's gone into this, you know, they don't just, you know, pull it out of a colouring book or something like that. These type of arguments to either deny or try and diminish this is piss poor, and yet the same people are selling the same story, and yet it's, well, again, it's built on either denial or extreme ignorance. Again, so we see those features there. But however, where did this come from? Well, if we go back to, for instance, Rome, and there we see the temple of Antonius and Faustina in the Roman Forum, one of the best surviving temples there, and we see the, well, now it's a griffin, but still the, because we have all four legs, but the tail, again, merging into this Acanthus scrollwork, and underneath the lantern, we see again Acanthus scrollwork going off. Here are some pictures of the temple, which has Corinthian columns as well. Interesting to note that in 1430, Pope Martin V, I think it was, transferred ownership of this temple to the chemist, the pharmacy guild, and that's and still they have a guild hall next door to it, which is still in operation, contains a museum. However, before the Romans, of course, the Greeks, well, the Greeks featured this griffin as well, especially connected to Apollo. Especially in regards to the golden age of Apollo, especially through Roman and Greek writers, a strong connection to many, and I'll get to those in the future. Not only the griffin, the swastika, but also Acanthus, and also the tripod, as in the tripod of Delphi and prophecy, which is a nice little link also to Ashoka, which is usually has these three lions around there as well. One of the, well, for instance, what's called the Acanthus column, the Dances of Delphi, and these three ladies, which are connected again through, well, Delphi, the oracle of Delphi, and the three graces, but also the looking the past, the present, and the future. And again, you'll just see these are very long held, been passed through. Once more, for instance, the sort of a Griffonic type cross creature there, but again you notice that the body has Acanthus emerging from it. Standard feature of a green man in cathedrals, going back to again the Greek period, but still going through the cathedrals up until this time. And for instance, in the modern era, again this connection with the Acanthus and the swastika, or the golden age of Apollo, which I believe. For instance, the San Francisco Library, not only is the lamp has again Acanthus decorations, but also the swastika, as well as the meander pattern which emerges from there. Now, now I can't remember the name of the author or of a book, but there's a very interesting theory in regards to the griffin, and well, it was used as a guardian, just like the Griffonic, and to guard treasury or temples and treasuries. Now, the interesting theory, which I think holds quite a bit of water, is that the early miners who were mining gold and silver would encounter fossils such as these. They were even featured in Greek temples as descriptions of these types of fossils featured, and that they found these types of mythical creatures in the mines as they were looking for gold and silver, and that this developed into the concept of these creatures being guardians, so as they guarded the gold and silver in the mine, they were also then developed into guardians of the treasury, such as the Delian League treasury in the Parthenon, Temple of Artemis. All these temples were, again, not just religious centers, but treasury buildings, political centers, and education centers, so academies will be attached to them. This is a terror bird, which was one of a megafauna just before the last ice age. You can imagine, you see the size of it, this, and that this memory echoed through of these terrifying creatures and the power that they had. But back to the Corinthian order of architecture and the Acanthus, but especially the concept of Corinthian as a system of measurement, which I strongly, more and more strongly, not only was it the Corinthian, well, not only was the Cremona foot developed from the Corinthian foot as based on temple of Olympian Zeus, first Corinthian order temple. There are others in there, but I began by comparing Greek and Indian architecture, especially through the Sanchi Stupa and Gandhara in this Greco-Buddhist period, and how this symbolism is still carried through, especially again, the Masons are the most well known. Unfortunately, very maligned. And again, this sort of is, I have to say, on my own study, I broke free of this David Icke-esque, Alex Jones type of falsehoods and very poor research. Everyone's evil except for me. Send me money now type of people. I think it's very, very unfortunate. But the comparison between the units of measure, such as in the Parthenon and the Temple of Olympian Zeus, and the connections between symbolism, architectural design in places such as Sanchi Stupa, just like Olympian Zeus, there's a lot more examples of it, and there are many, many examples across the Buddhist world, which is now in Pakistan and northern India. But the Sanchi Stupa itself, there's some references out there that say it's 54. No, it's actually 56 feet. And unfortunately, some authoritative sources really get the measures messed up. But it's 56 feet high, which is exactly the same height as the Temple of Olympian Zeus. Now, the foot was developed long before standard history will give it credit for. The Salamis stone is an example of that it's built into these temples. It's quite there, clearly there to be measured. And so not only do we see these same proportions, these same measures emerging over time across cultures, across the world, in very important major temple buildings, not just some random pile of rocks or whatever, or as one person claimed, if you throw a box of toothpicks on the ground, you can find these proportions. Really just infantile arguments. It's really just incredibly stupid, some of the ways that people put the blinkers on because it's not in the official textbooks, therefore it can't be true. I'll invent some really stupid argument to counter it. But 56 feet is 48 Cremona feet, just as the Parthenon is 48 Cremona feet. Again, each of these form harmony points between Doric, Ionic and Corinthian at very beautiful numbers which correspond to musical scales, astronomical scales and geometric, again, built into the geometry. Whether it's a proportion, whether it's a measure, typically it's both. So it's built into a proportion, but also literally in number in the measurements. And as we could see, 42 and 14 feet. These are the same measures, same numbers used in, again, cathedrals, buildings all across, for instance, here in Sydney, Washington, elsewhere, across the world, across time, across cultures, always coming back to harmonic points. This knowledge has been passed on. I used to be a bit skeptical on the ancient origins of groups such as Oddfellows, Freemasons, Rosicrucians. However, it's becoming clearer and clearer. It's the visual symbolism is quite clear, but also the systems of measurement, the proportions of a temple, it's all built in there. So just as we'll do a quick review. So what we have, Sanchi Stupa, all these very important elements, even the depictions, quite clearly show that there is this cross fertilization between cultures who are bringing each other knowledge. That now, still to this day, Jains, Buddhists, Hindus, their major statues, for instance, will be built at 108 feet high, 108 English feet. Why wouldn't they be using some strictly speaking, Hindu-Buddhist unit? Well, they are. Just the fact is that these measures all correspond to one another, come back together at not only whole numbers, but at beautiful numbers. Numbers built around, especially the quadrivium, numbers that will deliver us the measures of sun, earth, moon, stars, geometry, music, and again, beautiful arithmetic. The plants, the designs, the features, it's all there. Again, just carries on, carries on. Now, either it's even been passed on through Hollywood, etc., or it's somehow in our residual memory. I don't know, but clearly it is there. It's been passed on. There's no doubt about it. Acanthus, it's a thing. Systems of measurement, Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian, it's a thing. It's connected. To call to to use this, as someone recently posted, it's that I'm seeing. It's like seeing shapes of animals in clouds, or like seeing getting a pile of toothpicks and dropping them on the floor. You're going to get phi and pi proportions and this type of stuff. Absolute nonsense. It's firstly, it's a false comparison, because a box of 1,000 toothpicks compared to a few core dimensions within the building. There's only one height, there's only one width, there's only one depth. Trying to compare that with 1,000 toothpicks randomly strewn across the floor, just really stupid, incredibly dense, fundamentalist denial. So with that, I hope you enjoyed. Lots more to come in regards to this. Again, we're going really quickly through these. Lots more examples, lots more info, all the documentations. With that, have a good one.